because in my position, as you mentioned, the C-suite, you mentioned as a decision maker, we need to make our decisions and our process moving forward based on solid evidence that this is happening or this is our opportunity, not just based on, we have an assumption or hope. We're seeing this data, that's what's coming to us. So it's a collaboration between all parties. When I sit in a room with this team, our teams, I don't pretend to know everything or to know all the answers of this is how we should navigate. A lot of it is questions I ask and to get the information from them to help me make those decisions with them.
Welcome to another episode of the Intelligence Fabric. We're back for season 3. First 2 seasons, we really set the stage. We put a lot of definition out there, introducing a new category into the multifamily space called Intelligence Fabric. That's going to give way to decision machines in the coming months. But let's take a step back. Let's talk to some real professionals out there in the multifamily space that are putting decisions into practice, using data to put decisions into practice, using data to inform their decision-making out in the marketplace. Today, I had the opportunity to catch up with Nick Cenatiempo from Campbell Communities, and we unpack everything related to market. Now, Nick sits in a revenue management role in Campbell Communities in a C-suite position. So we unpacked everything from the Monday meeting and how we make informed decisions in that context, how we settle disagreements. We talked about data collection. We talked about the disparate data sources that are out there in the multifamily space today, how we stitch all those things together to make informed decisions. We talked a little bit about what we think the future is going to look like. We didn't spend a ton of time on that because it's very hard to predict these days. But without further ado, please grab a journal, grab an old-fashioned pen, and get ready to take some notes and enjoy this conversation that I had with Nick. Nick, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Mike. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, I'm excited about this conversation, and I'm excited in part because the way we came together is through a mutual acquaintance, Jessica Ferguson, who I think dearly of. I know you do as well. And she has a mutual friend named Jessica, who I'm acquainted with as well. But it's kind of neat how the industry works in that way, I think.
Yeah, for sure. It definitely does. And as you know, Jessica's a really close friend of mine and has had a lot of impact, a huge impact on me in the industry, and really, really lucky to be friends with her.
Yeah, definitely. Nick, I'd like to sort of set context for this conversation. The current role that you hold, can you just talk a little bit about that? And then we're going to segue right into a marketing conversation to scratch an itch that I have. So anyway, if you could just kind of set context for us, that'd be great.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm the Chief Revenue Officer for Campbell Communities located in New England, specifically in the Massachusetts, New Hampshire area. And my role, I handle everything, and I wear many hats, like a lot of us do in multifamily. But for me, I focus heavily on the marketing and the revenue front. So anything from our ILS feeds, our marketing efforts with Google, to our leases, our renewals, our market repositioning, large scale renovations, new construction, and repositioning our brand within the market. And I work very closely with our Chief Operations Officer and Andrew Brown in terms of kind of moving our product forward in today's new age.
New age. That's really a good segue. I'll tell you. Nice. We teed that one up fantastically. I appreciate that context because I'm deeply interested as of late in the involvement, the level of involvement that an owner, an asset manager, a revenue manager, sort of let's call it a C-suite for sake of conversation, or EVP, SVP kind of role in an organization, how much they think about marketing and how much influence they have over the spend as it relates to marketing and the demand that you're trying to create for your communities, as you implied there. So I think it's fair to say that revenue management, you kind of unpacked it. It's not just pricing. You can't just set it and forget it. You're kind of deciding where your demand comes from and where you place those dollars. So when a decision, let me start by saying, what decisions are you making, specific decisions are you making as it relates to trying to create demand for the communities beyond pricing?
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, it's very important to handle every asset, every property as its own entity. And as I oversee the portfolio, I look specifically at that market of where that property is located. And from there, that really drives what our goals are. So whether it's our occupancy goals or our budgetary goals. But for me, I am focused on what type of renter we're looking for. How are we going to get our information to that renter? But more specifically, and this is a really important point, is I don't put all my eggs in one basket. I try to be as dynamic as possible, and that's a big word I use. And part of that is I'm a former Division One athlete, and when I look at it, I say is as a pitcher, I have a fastball, and if it's not working, I need to go to a curveball, for example. So I need to be able to be dynamic and try different methods, different marketing methods in terms of our exposure on the web. So from our property website to our ILS feeds, how do we get from a 3D tour to a 3D floor plan to a 2D floor plan and be able to connect with any sort of renter in any demographic at any point?
So let me ask you this as it relates to that ecosystem that you just laid out. And I love that baseball analogy. There's a gentleman who I work with named Tim who loves baseball. He's going to love that. So I can't wait to share this episode with him. But when there's at least in my head, I spent 30 years in operations. There's a lot of judgment that lives up here. So there's all this technology, but in the end, there's a human involved that has judgment that sits in the head. When you think about that, is that judgment coming specifically from you? Is there a team of people sitting in a room talking about this? Kind of walk me through a day in the life of making judgment calls as it relates to creating demand for your communities.
Yeah, great question. For me, and how I operate here at Campbell, and this is the same for my chief operations officer, is we're boots on the ground. So I'm making decisions based on as clear facts as I can get. And that comes from my communication with my on-site teams. So whether it's an entry-level employee from a leasing agent to an assistant property manager, portfolio manager, et cetera, is those conversations are very, very important to me, but also helping them learn and educate on questions to ask and data to view. Because in my position, as you mentioned, the C-suite, you mentioned as a decision maker, we need to make our decisions and our process moving forward based on solid evidence that this is happening or this is our opportunity, not just based on, we have an assumption or hope. We're seeing this data. That's what's coming to us. So it's a collaboration between all parties. I don't, when I sit in a room with this team, our teams, I don't pretend to know everything or to know all the answers of this is how we should navigate. A lot of it is questions I ask and to get the information from them to help me make those decisions with them.
Can I ask if it's okay to share, what are some of those just examples of some of those questions that you might ask? And in the context of the decision, so what are the decisions you're trying to make with that information? And then what are the questions you're asking to get that information to make those decisions?
Yeah, for sure. I think for us right now, like I'll give you a prime example, is where we have a certain property that's undergoing a lease up. And we're looking at our lease up phase in terms of how well the velocity is moving of the units. And part of that is when we look at it is we're not converting as well as we wanted to, or we think we are. We're not leasing at strong velocity. We're also not offering concessions at this time. We have strong demand. We have strong tours scheduled. But in terms of converting those tours to move-ins, we're just not seeing that data. But they're coming to our door. So something's telling us that they like what they see on the web, on the front from their mobile device, but it's just not converting once they get to us. So something's missing there. So those decisions I make is one, the conversations we have with those prospects when they're on site with us, what's important to them, but also more importantly, what is their complaints or objections to the property? And then from there is why are they not leasing? Why are they not moving in with us? Or why are they? And those are the hard questions that we have to ask and the good discussion we have to create that comfortability with them. And from there, that information we get in those conversations will help me make one, considerations, increase in ad spend, where we have strong demand, but is it the right demand? Is it the right consumer that we're appealing to? Maybe we have to alter a few things on our ILS feeds or on our Google ads, whatever the case is. That's where I go back and have those discussions.
So what is interesting to me in what you say is there's let's say that's on the ground, field level data consumption or collection, right? Then my imagination tells me you could sit down in front of, you probably have dual monitors. You have dashboards on those two
Yeah.
monitors. Those
Yeah.
dashboards come from disparate systems. So you have, the point I'm getting to is you have all the data in the world now. How do you stitch that data together in order to make an informed decision about where you place marketing dollars? If you discern that it's a people issue, that's one thing. But if you discern that
Yeah.
it's a channel issue, how do you stitch all that together to make an informed decision where you're going to put those dollars?
Yeah, it's hard. That's hard, and it's very hard. And we're a proud partner of Entrata, and the reporting opportunities within Entrata is, I mean, the sky's the limit. And we have data available to us that we've never had before. And the question you have is, we have such a full throttle of data, and when I look at the data, it's going to tell us a story. But the question I ask, and I actually get this from our CEO, who was a longtime journalist before, taking over our company. So he's very, very good at asking questions and looking to dig into the root of what's happening. And from my standpoint, is when I try to connect it to, I'm looking at the data and looking at what it's telling me, and I'm saying, okay, I'm seeing this volume of leads, I'm seeing this cost per lease, I'm seeing this cost per move-in, for example, but it's not to the level I want it to. So as I look at both scenarios, I'm very heavily going to rely on the staff in terms of their in-person experiences, because it's only going to get me, that data is only going to get me to a certain point, to a certain level. And I can make a decision off that, but without their input, without that collaboration from them on those conversations in person, in those units, in those buildings, walking the property, that's going to tie everything in for me. That's going to make the data complete, because there's that human element and then there's that full data and element that's also going to be pulled in through an AI in the leasing front as well, based on the data we get.
Yeah, it's. I'm not certain how long you've been in the industry. I know it's been several. Let's call it several years.
Yeah.
I've been around a long time, but the evolution of data and data availability has just been, especially in the last, say, let's call it 5 to 7 years, has just been almost too much.
Yeah, yeah, it is. And, it's very helpful in a lot of ways, but, it can be overwhelming. And also the part is certain people interpret the data in certain ways.
Yes.
Mike might look at the data and say, okay, well, we have X amount of scheduled leads rather than converted leads, or your cost per lease is X. In Mike's experience, you might interpret it one way rather than I interpret it. And that's where the good discussion comes about, and rather finding what's in the best interest of the business rather than, does this make sense? What do you think about it? And really peel the onion on those discussions.
Definitely. I want to go back and pull on a thread. You talked about meeting with team members and collecting data, like call it frontline data, frontline information. I don't want to lead the witness here, but it sounds like a training opportunity also, where you're teaching, training, mentoring, coaching those individuals. In those, do you find that because you do that, you have team members at the site level and potentially in your corporate environment that are more adept at having a conversation with an owner and an asset manager or somebody in the C-suite versus somebody that doesn't or isn't armed with that type of information?
Yeah, yeah, great point. We how we operate here at Campbell, I think that's important to know is, education is very big, big, big for us, and growth not necessarily isn't vertical movement within promotions, and obviously that's important to us. But we want to give them the tools to feel empowered to be able to think within a framework. And for us, is I meet every employee on the operations side that comes in, whether it's an entry level or not. And same thing for operations, chief operations, they meet every maintenance, every person who comes in as well. And on that front is we look to marry our hiring process in terms of taking initiative, valuing teamwork and collaboration, wanting to grow, wanting to learn. And then when we get them here, they will have monthly meetings or sometimes biweekly meetings with us on the C-suite based on what we're talking about. And that's that education training, because we want to be able to build that through our company, and we want to be approachable. And quite frankly, as I mentioned to you before, the information they have on the human to human, that is valuable to me. So we create that learning environment for them to help them learn, help them grow, and it's going to better us. It's really important, and that converts for us.
Yeah, I talk to lots of people throughout the course of a day or a month or even a year. And it's interesting to me, you sort of, this is anecdotal, just based on those conversations, that you're starting to see this shift where, call it site level team members, property managers, certainly leasing team members, but that corporate level marketer is becoming more adept at having those conversations. And it seems like based on that richer dialogue, there are better decisions that are being made today than in the past, where you kind of had a proxy in the room talking about marketing and not the
Yeah.
real expert.
Right. Right. For sure. For sure. Anything that comes up that is marketing related for me in terms of moving our needle forward, I want to talk to them. I want to have a conversation about what they think about it, how they think about it from their lens on site, and how us adding more spend or a different strategy to our efforts, what does that mean to them and how do they think about it, and see where that takes us.
So I have a question as it relates to that. If you're, let's say, look, it'd be great if we lived in a rosy world and it was just peaches and cream all of the time, but we don't. And my gut tells me in an organization like yours, because your culture is open, or at least what I'm gleaning from you is that it's open. You have a meeting, you have all the right subject matter experts in the room, but let's say those subject matter experts are at odds with one another. So one's looking at a dashboard and discerning it one way, to your point earlier, and you're discerning it a different way. Talk to me about how that conversation sort of evolves, how you finally settle on the data you're going to look at, the definitions that go around that data, and how you use that to make a right call or what you
Yeah.
perceive to be a right call.
Yeah, and that happens often. And part of that is the environment that I create or our team creates on that call, meaning a C-suite employee, a chief revenue officer comes onto a call with our on-site team, for example. How open or do they want to be with me? And that's why we want to create this kind of really comforting environment where we can have good discussion. When we get into an environment where we don't align or
Yeah.
we don't necessarily agree, that's one of the best teaching moments and growth opportunities for us. And for me specifically, because I know what grabs me and I know what engages me to ask more questions about what they think, but then also where's this information from? What is the sample size of that information? Because that's critical. Are we talking about 10? So are we talking about 10 tours? Are we talking about 10 leads that come through it? Are we talking about 50 to 100? Because that is critical as well, because I'm looking at it from a 30,000 foot view across 30,000 leads, for example.
Yeah.
They might be looking at it through 10 leads or 100 leads. And this is common when I work with our on-site teams. Is the last 6 tours was X, meaning they had an issue with price. Okay, well, was it really price? What made you think it was price? What questions did we ask before? What research did they do on our community before coming? What source did they come in through? And that's going to lead us down a conversation of, well, what about the other 400 leads? What was their theory? What did they say? And then it kind of opens the conversation up a little bit more. Well, maybe it's just this one set of consumers in that time frame. Maybe it was just that pocket of leads. And we try to put it in different perspectives of what is, in the grand scheme of things, what is actually a problem versus a pocket of samples within that time frame. And then from there, we discuss an opportunity for what questions didn't we ask? Which ones did we get the information we're looking for to make that strategic decision? And if not, how do we move forward from this? And that's where it comes down. But the biggest thing here is for me, and this is one thing I'm aware of, Mike, and is I'm 6'4". So when I walk in a room, I have a presence about myself, and this is something I need to work on personally, is it can be intimidating. So creating that space for that discussion is very important for me, to feel that comfortable, to help them feel comfortable to have those discussions.
Yeah, it's, you and I have the same affliction. I'm 6'6", played basketball, and it sounds like you played
There
baseball
you go.
in college,
Yeah.
and so it's yeah, you sometimes you have no idea the impact you have in a room because you take up so much space, right?
Yeah,
And
for
it's
sure.
but to your other point, to the extent you go out of your way to make it, let's call it psychologically safe for people to just be open and vulnerable, and they can make a mistake and not feel like they're going to get grounded for it. That's really,
Right.
really important, because then you're going to get true information. You're not going to get the filtered kind of information.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, you're 100% right. We've always viewed it that way at Campbell is if there is a mistake, it's an opportunity to help them learn and grow. And we operate that on daily.
Yeah. I love that. I think you know this as well as I do that multifamily runs on people and I mean, AI is the buzz these days, but it still takes people to run an
Yeah.
organization. It
Yeah.
still takes people to sell apartments. And to the extent that you make them feel great, I think a happy employee is a productive employee. I guess we'll kind of say it like that.
Yeah, 100%.
So talk to me about if I want to get to your revenue management roots. If you're seeing, I imagine that you guys price down to the unit type, amenity based type pricing. If you see a spike in, say, a floor plan before you reach for that pricing level or lever rather, because many times, at least my experience is that revenue management is sort of counterintuitive. And if you're not reading it from that lens, you'll make decisions based on what the data is telling you versus actually what your gut is telling you. So if you see a spike in something, your gut tells you one thing, your actions might be different. Can you kind of walk me through when that's happened, when you saw the dashboard, but you didn't trust it, so you did something different?
Yeah, yeah, no, a great point is for me, it's when I see a spike, when see a spike, whether it's floor plan availability, let's just say unit type spikes where we have a tremendous amount of availability, or I see a spike in sort of market rent that I'm projecting for that floor plan as well, is what I'm looking at specifically first is historical data, is in certain scenarios that we've seen before, and we know all data is historical, but in this factor, I'm looking at basically whether it's a past 12 months, I'm looking at a past calendar year of what has happened for that unit, specifically that unit type in certain locations which are secluded to parts of the property. And the reason why that's important is for us is majority of our portfolio is traditional New England garden style brick buildings. So 3 floors, 24 units. And for me, a lot of my practices can be modeled from property to property based on theories. And the other part is a lot of our properties are close within proximity. So for me, when I see that spike, I have a large sample size across probably 6 to 7 properties that I can refer to. So for me, before I'm trusting that data or seeing that data in terms of what's happening or the story that it's telling, I'm gonna pause and look at that data, talk to our on-site team and see what they're seeing. Is that when you talk about amenity pricing, which is critical, what is a negative association with that unit? Is it a location? Is it on the back area of the woods? Is it facing a dumpster, for example? How close is it to the parking lot, whether it comes to parking situation in negative associations of flashing lights? So for me, I'm looking at all factors of that, but I'm trying to get as granular as I can with that specific unit type and what is the variation with it. For example, we look at a substantial spike in units. Is it due to they're all on the second floor, or is it a top floor or bottom floor issue?
Mm,
Because all those comes with their own issues. So I'm really trying to peel that back as best I can based on what I'm seeing in that spike.
that makes sense. I want to transition that to a budget conversation. Again, I'm basing a lot on my experience, but my imagination tells me at some point throughout the year, you start to think about budgeting for, let's say it's 26 now, you're budgeting for 2027. Kind of frame up how that discussion happens as it relates to the marketing sources or channels that you budget for. Is it a historical look back and let's just kind of flatline that going forward, or do we take a deeper analytical look at it and come up with how we're going to budget for the coming year?
Yeah, it's a deeper analytical look. And the reason why is each one of our properties is in some form of repositioning.
Ah,
So one property I might be doing a substantial renovation. We might be upgrading units on turn as we're going. We might have substantial capex happening on that property, whether it's a new clubhouse build, whether it's a lease up, for example, on a non-traditional lease up like a renovation end. So for me, I'm looking at it as asset to asset and what the property needs. And specifically, what's important here is, Mike, in New England, we're a heavily congested market. So the demand is substantial due to the supply. It always will be for a long period of time.
mhm.
Specifically, Massachusetts is coming out with rent control or proposing rent control, which is a topic of conversation. So new supply is not coming every single day. That's going to impact kind of a lot of how we do things just right now. So for me, it depends on the asset and what that property is going through. And then from there, I'll allocate dollars based off that. For example, a property that just comes off a renovation or a large scale property renovation, I'm going to peel back on stabilization like a traditional lease up. I'm going to peel back the marketing dollars pretty substantially. But if we have a hot hand on another property where we have very good consistent turn, so for us, we look at 30%. If we can get that high, it's hard because of that supply control. If we can get that high, I'm going to want to play that hot hand, increase ad spend, start flooding the prospects into us, convert on those new unit renovations that we're focused on.
That makes sense. And how, just out of curiosity, whether you're reducing spend or you're increasing spend to take advantage of those hot moments, how do you discern where you put those dollars? So if we, without naming names, you've got like 3 major ILSs, you've got
Yeah.
AdWords related to the big G, but how do you
Yeah.
decide which ones
Yeah.
to draw down, which ones to juice up, if you will?
Yeah, for sure. I'm looking at straight performance in terms of what they're providing to me. And what I'm seeing on that's where the data comes into play so much for me is which ones are converting and why, and what is that data telling me in the previous 365 days on how that source has played. And then in partnership with the on-site team is seeing from that source, the type of prospect, the type of demographic that's maybe coming through the door, how does that impact? Because that's going to alter what I do.
Okay, so now let's imagine for a moment you've set your budget for 2027. The year starts to play out, the actuals start to come in, and you see that you need to juice something up and you're going to break budget. How do you sort of reconcile going beyond what you put in for the calendar year? You're just going to bust the budget. How does that? How do you have that conversation, and then what do you do as a result of that conversation?
Yeah, generally before I get to that point, I'm looking at a situation whether it's if I do this, am I going to offset on the income end? If I am, if the
Yeah,
income's going to increase, and a big word here is the trade out,
yeah,
which is
yeah,
if I could have a license plate, it's going to be a trade out.
yeah.
And
I love that.
it just focus heavily on trade outs. If I'm seeing strong trade outs, and the math is going to make sense for me to increase marketing or ad spend due to a certain scenario that property is going through, whether CapEx, repositioning, whatever the case is, and I'm going to see that based on data, then I'll go with it. Then I'll go for it because it's still, in my mind, I'm still going to view it as the OPEX to NOI is still going to balance out into our target, whether it's a 40% OPEX to NOI, whatever the case is. If that maths out, then I'll go for it.
That makes
And
absolute
it's
sense.
specifically, sorry, Mike,
Go.
specifically as I look at it is at that time on the business end is what's in the best interest of the community. Because if it makes sense for us, if we to increase ad spend and we're going to see it on the return and increase our rent roll, then it makes business sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. It seems an incredibly logical way to look at it. I I am okay. So I have 2 more questions for you before we call it a day here or an episode. One is related to your discipline today in terms of revenue management. It has it and how it relates to marketing. Certainly, we have a lot of technology making impact on multifamily specifically, but even more broadly in nature. How do you see your role evolving and potentially marketing and the decisions you have to make in marketing evolving over the next, whatever, call it 3 years, 5 years, or even 3 months? Because it seems like everything's moving that fast these days.
Yeah, good question. I think it's something we think about pretty often because of how the industry, specifically in prop tech, is evolving rapidly and fast. For me, I think to answer your question, I'm always going to stay up to date on the newest trends or the newest tech that's going to help us improve our business. But I learned this a long time ago, and it's specifically another sports analogy for you is it's not necessarily the bat that they're using to hit with. It's the player. And we still have to focus on the fundamentals of what we're doing, even with these new evolvements in tech and new evolvements in terms of our industry evolving on that front. And what I mean by that is we have to focus on the fundamentals of answering the phone,
Mm,
presenting our property well, and being on the human element because we're going to use these tools to support our employees, to help them be more efficient, to help them feel empowered, feel like they have the skills or the tools to do their job as best they can. But it's not going to replace the fundamentals that we need to focus on. So in my role, it's the challenge to keep that in my mind, being able to see it both ways, see it both of my eyes, is forward thinking in terms of our availability, our opportunity with technology, opportunity to see how my role will change, whether it's on the revenue end and tools become more sophisticated, quicker, smarter. But it's never going to replace that opportunity to create that human element that's going to be able to connect with our employees, but our consumer, and move our company forward into 2030, for example.
Yeah, no, it's so interesting because it is moving so swiftly. Human aside, it's moving so swiftly that it's very hard to even predict what the next 3 years are going to look like. It's really hard.
It is really hard, and it's also and this is one of my things as I'm getting ready to fly out to NAA next week is, but also the new initiatives. Who's going to be here in a year, 2 years after?
Yeah.
Who's going to sustain it? Because the decisions we make here at Campbell on the C-suite level, for example, we're forward thinking. So we're trying to make decisions that can impact our assets for the next 30 years,
Yeah.
40 years.
Yeah.
And it's hard having conversations about companies. Do they have the funding? Do they not? Are they going to be here in 5 years? Are they not? That's why for us, it's delicate. We have to take it day by day.
Okay, I lied to you. I have one more question. I actually have two more questions, but I said two just a second ago. Okay, the one question before the last is I've worked in, I think, 4 different organizations, different sizes, from the REIT world to private family offices. Do you have an internal discipline or structure that you use to introduce new technology into your ecosystem? Do you go through a formal process, or is that kind of like somebody brings an idea to you and it's not so structured? It's just kind of a loose, yeah, look at it a little bit and yeah, it's cool. Let's try it. How does that work in your company? Because I've seen it all.
Yeah,
I think I've seen
yeah. No, that's important. I think as I've evolved in my career, it's changed. And right now, early on, I think I was a little bit more of, to that informal end. Now we are, our chief operations officer, Andrea Brown, we work so closely together in terms of vetting and having really good discussion on new tech or no new ecosystem to roll out we're not blind to what we are interested in, what we think is right, but is it going to fit for the employee and the prospect? That supersedes my thought, feeling, data is how are they going to be able to use this? Does this make sense? What does the pilot look like? What is the timing of this rollout? Is it a one property thing? Is it a building opportunity, for example? And we try to have a thorough vetting process and discussion about new opportunities, whether it's an ecosystem and technology of some nature. Just because, for example, everyone will say they integrate. Well, sure, they do.
it.
But how good is the integration? And then you have referrals. Well, how good is that referral? Because they're not going to give me a negative referral, right? They're positive referrals. So we have to do our own research and our own kind of background checks to make sure we're making the best decision for our company. And it's not what I want. It's not what Mike wants. It's what's in the best interest of the company that we get to the decision on. It's not who's right, who's wrong. It's what's in the best interest for us.
I like that you include the team member and the consumer, because a lot of times that voice gets left out of the room. And to your point, you might make that decision, but it might not be in the best interest of the company because it's not.
They're the ones using it.
That's right. That's right.
And from my standpoint is they're the ones who are hardworking. They're on site every day. They're working as hard as they can to do the best that they can. And we don't want to deploy a new initiative to them and it doesn't work for how they actually work on site, because as often as I am on site, I'm on site right now for this, is I'm not on that desk every single day, 5 days a week. I'm not. And I'm not going to pretend I am. So their feedback is really important, and good discussion. We put a lot of weight in.
Well, Nick, so the last question I want to ask you is there something that I did not ask you or I did not touch on that you think would be important for our audience to hear?
I think for anyone who is listening, whether you have aspirations of, moving your career through marketing or on the revenue end, or is my biggest thing, this is what was taught to me is learn, educate, grow, put yourself out there and be a student of the industry, ask questions, and you're never going to know everything, and just try to evolve as much as you can. And the only one who's going to do that is yourself. Is take that initiative to learn and grow and be your best self advocate to move your career forward. It's the best advice that was given to me. So
Wise. Whoever that sage was, that's very wise advice. So thank you for sharing it with our audience. All right, Nick, I appreciate you investing a little bit of time with me this morning. I know you're a busy guy. I know you're on site. That's very cool. I love that. But anyway, I thank you, appreciate you, and hopefully we'll do this again soon. I'll see you next week.
All right, sounds good, Mike. I appreciate it. Again, thank you so much for having me, you and Jessica as well over there. And yes, I'll see you most likely at the podcast Palooza. I assume that's where you'll be.
Yes, awesome. Thank you.
Awesome.